This is your weekly space traffic report provided by NextSpaceflight. We kicked off the week right where we left off on the last traffic report, with a return from space. With the launch of SpaceX's 11th crew rotation mission to the International Space Station, it was time for the crew of Crew 10 to return home. Crew Dragon Endurance and its crew of 4 undocked from the station's front docking port on August 8th at 22:15 UTC. After roughly 17 hours in orbit around Earth, the spacecraft deorbited and splashed down on August 9th at 15:33 UTC off the coast of San Diego in California. On board Endurance were Commander and NASA astronaut Anne McClain, pilot and NASA astronaut Nicole Ayers, mission specialist and JAXA astronaut Takuya Onishi, and mission specialist and Roscosmos cosmonaut Kirill Peskov. With this mission, McClain and Onishi get to add another spaceflight to their careers, with McClain now having spent a total of about 351 days in space, while Onishi's total in space has now roughly 262 days. This was Ayers and Peskov's first trips to space, so they get to log the 147 days of the mission. This was the shortest SpaceX crew rotation mission to the station to date at just 5 months in duration. This shorter crew rotation mission allows for the launch later this month of the CRS-33 Cargo Dragon, which will be using the same docking port on the station that Crew 10 used. This cargo mission includes a trunk outfitted with extra propellant tanks and thrusters in order to perform reboosts of the ISS, and will stay docked to the station until December. Since there are only 2 docking ports on the US operating segment of the station, this meant that either Crew 10 would have had to stay at the station for nearly a year, until January, or there wouldn't have been a docking port available for a direct handover between crews as is customary. Crew 10 has also now become the first Crew Dragon mission for NASA to splash down off the coast of California following the transition of Dragon recovery operations from Florida to California. The previous crew rotation mission for NASA, Crew 9, had been the last to splash down off the coast of Florida back in March. Since then, SpaceX has flown 2 private spaceflight missions, From 2 and Axiom 4, which have both splashed down off the coast of California, but this was the first for NASA. Coming back to Earth, this weekend launches started with the Falcon 9 with more internet satellites, but this time they were Kuiper satellites from Amazon. Falcon 9 took off from Space Launch Complex 40 on August 11th at 12:35 UTC following a series of scrubs and delays, the first due to vehicle side issues and later for launch and then recovery weather. The rocket was carrying 24 Kuiper satellites for Amazon into low Earth orbit. With this mission, there are now a total of 102 operational Kuiper satellites in orbit, just over 1,500 more to go, Amazon. Good job. This mission, just like the previous Falcon Kuiper flight, made use of a brand new booster, B1091. However, this one was special because it technically wasn't a proper Falcon 9 booster, but rather a Falcon Heavy center core flying in Falcon 9 configuration. Falcon Heavy center cores are specially made with thicker tank walls and reinforcements in order to take the loads from the Falcon Heavy side boosters during flight. This makes them a bit heavier than the regular Falcon 9 boosters, but if the rocket has plenty of margins, it should be just as good to use in Falcon 9 configuration. For this to happen, instead of installing the specific Falcon Heavy interstage and having the connections for the side boosters on the interstage and octaweb, the booster is just outfitted with the regular Falcon 9 interstage and normal Falcon 9 octaweb hardware. Now, the whole reason that SpaceX is doing this is because when these center cores fly on Falcon Heavy, they rarely get recovered, let alone reused. This means that the bulk cost of building one of these goes away in just one flight. Whereas, if they instead use it as a Falcon 9 booster first and fly it a few times, then at least they can recoup some of the expenses of having to build it in the first place before flying it on a Falcon Heavy mission as a center core and most likely expending it. From Florida, we go to French Guiana, where this week we had the 3rd flight of the Ariane 6 rocket. Liftoff happened on August 13th at 37 minutes past midnight UTC, with Ariane 6 carrying the METOP SGA-1 satellite for the European Space Agency and EUMETSAT. The METOP SGA-1 is a weather observation satellite, part of the Meteorological Operational Second Generation Satellite System, which is what gives the satellite's METOP SG name. The system consists of 2 series, the METOP SGA and METOP SGB series. The A series of satellites carry primarily optical instruments, while the B series of satellites carry primarily microwave imaging instruments. There are 3 planned satellites per series for a total of 6 satellites in this constellation, with this being the first of the A series. Some of the instruments on board the A series of satellites include a visible and infrared imager, a radio occultation instrument, a multi-viewing, multi-channel, multipolarization imager, and also ESA's Sentinel-5 spectrometer. This array of instruments will allow allow the satellites to gather weather information in greater detail than the previous generation. The data gathered from these satellites will better help scientists on the ground to improve weather forecasts as well as study Earth's ever-changing climate patterns. 19 minutes after Ariane 6's liftoff from French Guiana, ULA's Vulcan rocket also lifted off on its third flight, carrying the USSF-106 mission of the U.S. Space Force into geostationary Earth orbit. This was a mission of first for ULA and Vulcan. This marked the first launch of Vulcan for the U.S. Department of Defense after having been certified to fly on the department's national security space launch missions earlier this year. This was a major win for ULA as it demonstrated that its long-delayed Vulcan rocket could finally start delivering military payloads into orbit. ULA is in fierce competition with fellow launch company SpaceX, who has already taken several lucrative launch contracts from ULA's hands, both from the military and also from NASA. ULA will now need to demonstrate that it can keep the cadence and continue delivering future payloads with Vulcan, including for Amazon's Kuiper constellation, which has dozens of launches under contract with this rocket. One of the other firsts for this mission was that it was the first flight of Vulcan on its 4 solid rocket motor configuration, with the previous 2 flights carrying only 2 of them. With its 4 GEM 63XL solid rocket motors and its 2 BE-4 engines, this launch also marked the most powerful rocket ever launched by ULA, surpassing the thrust of the Atlas V in its 5 SRB configuration. From the US, we go to China. A Changzheng 5B rocket, fitted with a Yuanzhong 2 kickstage, launched from Wenchang on August 13th at 6:43 UTC, carrying another batch of Guowang internet satellites into low Earth orbit. This was the 8th dedicated operational launch for this constellation, which now brings the total number of Guowang satellites launched into orbit up to 67. This week, we also had a doubleheader of Starlink missions, with the first taking place from Vandenberg on August 14th at 5:05 UTC. The mission was carrying 24 Starlink V2 mini satellites into low Earth orbit. The booster flown on this mission, B-1093, was flying for a 5th time and successfully landed on SpaceX's drone ship Of Course I Still Love You. A few hours later, at 12:29 UTC, another Falcon 9 launched from Florida, carrying a batch of 28 Starlink V2 mini satellites into low Earth orbit. The first stage for this mission, B-1085, was flying for a 10th time, and it successfully landed on SpaceX's drone ship Just Read the Instructions. With these 2 Starlink missions, SpaceX has now launched a total of 9,394 Starlink satellites into orbit, of which 1,234 have re-entered, and 7,103 have moved into their operational orbits. Wrapping up the week, we had the 3rd launch of Landspace's Zhuche 2E rocket from Zhochuan. Unfortunately, it doesn't seem like this was a fully successful launch. Unconfirmed reports on Chinese social media indicate a potential failure of the second stage thrust vector control system during ascent, leaving the stage unable to control its steering, deviating it from its trajectory. Going into next week, we expect a launch of a Soyuz 2.1A rocket from the Baikonur Cosmodrome, carrying the Bion M No. 2 spacecraft. What's interesting about this launch is that the Bion M spacecraft are based on the Vostok spacecraft that flew way back during the early days of human spaceflight in the early 1960s. Aside from their use with humans on board, back in the day, they would also use these to fly film cameras that would then be recovered and analyzed afterwards for reconnaissance. Of course, now with digital cameras, this is no longer needed, but they're still being used to carry certain experiments into orbit that they can then recover afterwards for inspection. You know the saying, if it ain't broke, don't fix it? Well, in this case, they've been carrying that out now for over 60 years, hence why they're still using a modernized version of the Vostok capsule. From the United States, we also expect a couple of Starlink launches from Vandenberg, both of which will be heading southwest. So if you're in Southern California, you may be able to see them, but be mindful that this isn't the kind that hugs the coast, and they will be going away from you. These will also happen a few hours after sunrise, so the viewing conditions may not be perfect. Also next week, we'll have the USS F-36 mission from Florida. This will be the 8th launch of the secretive X-37B space plane from the U.S. Space Force, and it'll be the 3rd time it's launched on a SpaceX rocket. The first time it was on a Falcon 9 back in September 2017, and the second was just a few years ago in December 2023 on board a Falcon Heavy, which sent the spaceplane out into a highly elliptical orbit. This mission will see the first stage booster attempting a landing back on Landing Zone 2. You may recall that SpaceX recently retired Landing Zone 1. So with this return to land, it also means we should expect sonic booms across the eastern coast of Central Florida. Next week, we may also potentially have an Electron launch from New Zealand, but that's yet to be confirmed by Rocket Lab as of recording, though notices have started to be published. Once that's confirmed, I'm sure our next spaceflight teams will add it to our database. So if you want to stay up to date about that and any more upcoming launches and events, be sure to download the Next Spaceflight app on your phone or visit the website at nextspaceflight.com.